or had not run in vain. He wanted to make sure he was doing it correctly, okay? So then in verse 3, look at this. But then Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. It really means because he was a Greek. You see, Greeks didn't have the responsibility or to be circumcised. And so he goes, they were asking Titus, hey, Titus, you need to get circumcised to be cool, to be kind of in the groove here. And Paul says, whoa, wait a second. No way. He's a Greek. He didn't have that responsibility. He's a Gentile, right? And then it goes on, verse 4. Yet because of false brothers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us to slavery, to them we did not yield in submission, even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. Wow, that's awesome. He goes, yeah, you guys, hands off, man. Titus doesn't need to do this. Now, look at this in Acts. This is Paul's first missionary journey along with Barnabas. And it says that Paul came to Derbe and to Lystra, and a disciple was there named Timothy, and the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer, but his father was a Greek. Now, it's important to understand that on the most part in Judaism, you are determined whether you're Jewish or not by your mother, not by your father. Now, that's not true in every dimension of Judaism, but most of it. You're determined you're Jewish because of your mom, not because of your dad. And so here he has a Jewish woman who's a believer and evidently a Greek father who is not a believer. And Paul gets there. And in verse 2 he says, and he was well spoken of by the brothers in Lystra and Iconium. And Paul wanted Timothy to accompany him. He said, this guy has potential. I see a lot in this guy. I want him to come with me on the rest of our journey. I want him to be a part of what we're doing here. And so he says this. He wants Timothy to accompany him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those places. For they all knew that his father was a Greek, meaning they knew that his mother was Jewish. And I don't know about you, but I want to be in that room on that discussion. Like Timothy saying, what? You want to do what? I don't think so. This is not going to be fun. And Paul says, here's the deal, Timothy. Every place we go, we're going to go to the synagogue first. We're going to go to the Jew first and then to the Greek. We're going to go and proclaim the gospel to those in the synagogue first. And after a while, we will then move on to the Gentile. But when we go and speak to the Jews, they're all going to say, they're going to wonder, is he circumcised? Is he really Jewish? Has he really followed through on this? And if they said no, then there would be an automatic close to the gospel. And so Paul says, hey, Timothy, I need you to get circumcised. And if I'm Timothy, I'm saying, Paul, you owe me. You owe me big time, man, if this is going to happen. And sure enough, he does it so that the gospel would have an avenue rather than it being closed off. And so he has Timothy get circumcised. Like, wow. So those who are under the law, that he might become as one under the law, so that he might be able to communicate to those who are under the law with clarity, without roadblock, right? Now, look in verse 21. To those outside of the law, I became as one outside of the law. Not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ. He goes, I'm going to live as if I'm not under the law, but I'm never going to escape the law of Christ that will guide me in everything I do, so that I might win those outside of the law. Yeah, you don't have to obey all those religious laws. In fact, here's what I think it really means. Without violating, put this in a box, without violating any universal moral law that God has given, Paul felt free to ignore the religious laws that applied exclusively to Israel when he was interacting with the Gentile world. The gospel didn't say you have to become Jewish. That is what many thought early in the ministry. But he said, no, that isn't required. But look at this in Galatians chapter 2. But when Cephas, that's Peter, but when Cephas came to Antioch was up on the Mediterranean Sea, up north of Israel a ways. And this is where Paul and Barnabas were doing a lot of ministry. It's the very first town where people were ever called Christians. This is where it happened. And so when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him, Paul says, to his face, because he stood condemned. Wow, those are pretty strong words. Now in verse 12, for before certain men came from James, now James is the Lord's brother, half-brother, who is now the leader of the church in Jerusalem, okay? So before certain men came from James from Jerusalem, he was eating with Gentiles. It means Peter was hanging out with Gentiles. He had broken down all that, because usually a Jew would never eat with a Gentile. And he's hanging out with Gentiles. But when they came, meaning the men from Jerusalem, he drew back and he separated himself, fearing the circumcision party, fearing what those Jewish believers would think or say. And then in verse 13, and the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him. So Paul's hypocrisy was contagious, and all the other Jewish believers there pulled away from the Gentiles. And it says, so they acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. Barnabas was this really cool guy, but he even pulled away. Now, look at this, verse 14. But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter, to Cephas, before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? Your hypocrisy is stunning. And Peter goes, man, you're right. You're right. And he began to live among them, among those without the law, as if he didn't have the law either, only the law of Christ, right? So this is an amazing deal. Now, you guys, look at this. In Corinthians chapter 8, he says this, as another example. It says, however, not all possess this knowledge of what is right and wrong and what you don't, that you can eat meat offered to idols. This is in the chapter just before we're talking about. He says, not all possess this knowledge or this freedom, but some, though through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to idols, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So they're trying to get away from this, but they used to eat it as a pagan, eat this meat sacrificed to idols. But when anybody does, it violates them. They felt hurt by that. They felt confused. Look at verse 8. For food will not condemn us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. It doesn't matter, he says. So don't make a big deal out of it. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees that you have knowledgeable eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? He's saying you're confusing them. And by your knowledge, the weak person is destroyed. By your knowing that you can eat meat sacrificed to idols, and you take advantage of that, you are destroying your brother who has a weak conscience. Wow. And so this knowledge of this weak person is destroyed, and the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience, which is their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ himself. Not just your brother. You sin against Christ. Wow. Therefore, if food makes your brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. If it makes him uncomfortable, no problem. I will eat beans. I will eat rice, which is some of my favorite meal. But he says, man, I don't have to eat meat for their conscience. Wow, what incredible love he has. So for those who are weak, I became weak that I might win the weak, right? Now, go to verse 22. Let's box this. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I will do whatever it takes to communicate the gospel to them. I will not violate what is right and wrong, but I will live as a Jew, or I'll live under the law, or I'll live as not under the law, or I'll live as weak. I have become all things to all people that I might save some. You guys, this is one of my favorite authors, you know this, is Francis Schaeffer. In his book called The God Who Is There. And in discussing the responsibility to share the Christian message of hope with the world, he says this: we must remember that the person to whom we are talking, however far from the Christian faith he may be, is an image bearer of God. He has great value, and our communication with him must be in genuine love. Now box this next section. Love is not an easy thing. It is not just an emotional urge. Now you guys box this next inner box here and highlight it, okay? But he says this: but an attempt to move over and sit in the other person's place and see how his problems look to him. Love is not just an emotional urge, but it is sitting in their place and seeing what their problems look like to them. He goes on and he says, love is a genuine concern for the individual. As Jesus Christ reminds us, we are to love the individual as ourselves. This is the place to begin. He continues by saying this: therefore, to be engaged in personal witness as a duty or because our Christian circle exerts social pressure on us is to miss the whole point. The reason we do it is that the person before us is an image bearer of God, and he is an individual who is unique in the world. This kind of communication is not cheap. To understand and to speak to sincere but utterly confused 20th or 21st century people is costly. It is tiring. It will open you to temptations and pressures. But genuine love, in the last analysis, means a willingness to be entirely exposed to the person to whom you are talking. I think he's so right. You guys, every human being on planet Earth is an image bearer of God. Have profound value because of that. And the world looks a certain way to each and every one of them. And to sit and listen and hear it. It doesn't mean you have to affirm or agree. But until you understand, or at least try, it is hard to communicate the message of Christ. This is such a powerful thought. You guys, I think that there are 5 essential questions that every person on planet Earth has to ask and has to answer. And everyone does in their own way, sometimes in a not a very informed way. Here are these 5 questions. What is my origin? Where do I come from? Am I an accident that over a period of time has simply landed in this form? And somehow in that process, that turtle became the same, equally in the same process. Or is there a purpose behind this? What is my origin? We have to ask that. We have to answer that. Second, what is the meaning and purpose of life? People are searching for that. They are desperate for that right now. What is the meaning and purpose of life? Third, where might I find a solid moral structure for life? People are absolutely searching for that. 4, what is the destiny of life? What comes after this? If I knew where I came from, if I knew the meaning and purpose of life, and I have a solid moral structure, you still ask the question, where is this headed? Where is this going? What happens? Somehow we're all going to pass away. Then what? Is it just annihilation? Is it just nothing? Or is there something? We have to answer that question. And the last one, what do I do with the angst that I face as a result of being a broken person in a broken world? What do I do with that? You guys, these are critical questions that everyone has to ask, everyone has to answer. And I would suggest to you that the gospel is the only one that answers these sufficiently. That there's no other answers that make sense. And look at this in verse 23. Let's box this too. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. I do all of this so that the other people can experience the blessings of God rather than the absence of God, that they might have the presence of God. This is his motivation. You guys, here's what I think the gospel put in a sense, in a statement. The gospel is the good news of the kingdom of God where Jesus Christ, specifically, his life, his death, and his resurrection offers salvation and a path of reconciliation with God for all of humanity that impacts both our present situation and eternity. That good news answers the questions of life. You guys, this is, and I've thrown this at you before, but this is one of my favorite statements. It happens to be Francis Schaeffer again in a book he wrote called He is There and He is Not Silent. It was a dream he had for a place called Le Brie in Switzerland. This is my dream, frankly, for Quest. I dream of a Christianity that has balance. Not only exegetically, meaning biblically and understanding it, and intellectually, the fact that it makes sense and we can think that through and talk about it, but also in the area of reality. In all of reality, the real world, all of its good and all of its bad, but also in the area of reality and beauty. You know, sometimes when we talk about the world that we live in, we kind of present it as this so messed up and so screwed up and so ugly and so dirty and so rotten, and we can kind of just leave it there. Frankly, that's a lot of the worldview today. This is a worthless, crummy place that we all live in, and we ought to just blow a gasket. But I want a Christianity that has balance, not only exegetically and intellectually, but also in the area of reality and beauty. Because there is such beauty in this world in so many different ways, but especially by the person that you're faced with, made in the image of God. Wow. An insistence that beginning with the Christian system as God has given it to men, and this is a powerful statement, in the verbalized propositional revelation of the Bible, God has revealed himself in all that he thinks and all that it is. And look at this, that we can move along and find that every area of life is touched by truth and a song, by truth and grace, by the brutal reality and the incredible redemptive work of God. That's what I dream of. So let's see if we can finish up here. Verse 24. As a result of all that, he says this, do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? Now, you guys, what he's referring to is this. Behind the Olympic Games, in Corinth, they hosted the Isthmian Games. And it's kind of like the Olympic Games. It's just a little bit smaller. But there are all sorts of competitions. So here you can see, up there. Let's go to the next what's that called, slide? So in the Isthmian Games, there was wrestling, there was pancration. You can think, what is that? That's like MMA, UFC, the ultimate fighting. They could box, hit, kick, choke. They could do all sorts of stuff in pancration. There was chariot racing, there was boxing. There was even musical and theater and poetical competitions in this thing, but also running and relays. So if you entered into a running race, is what he's referring to here, we all run to win, right? Of course. Well, if you won, you got a wreath, okay? You got a wreath that went around your head. They were made out of either Isthmian pine leaves, Doesn't seem very comfortable to me, but you put this on your head. And here's the really cool one. The more common was a wreath of celery. So for you vegetarians, this would be a great place to be. So it was not just the stalks, but it was the flowered part, and they would weave it together and put it into a wreath, and you'd have this wreath of celery. Okay, I just thought it was funny. Okay, I just thought, okay, it's so weird. So let's go back to the passage. Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, either of pine or celery, but we do it for an imperishable wreath, one that will never fade, that lasts for eternity. Wow. And so he says this, so I do not run aimlessly, I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body to keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself would be excused or disqualified. He says, I will do whatever it takes to win the more for Christ. I'll be a Jew to the Jews. I'll be under the law for those under the law. I will be outside of the law for those who are outside of the law. I'll be weak for those who are weak. I will discipline my body. I will discipline my life to meet the needs of people and to tell them the gospel, the one that answers the questions of life. So let's get to kind of applying this today. So what do we do? So therefore, what now? What do we do with this? Here's 4 thoughts, okay? Here's the first one. We must highly value the life of every human being in the same way God values the life of every person because they are created in his image. If we devalue the life of a human being, we violate such a central piece of the gospel. Every human being has value. Everyone. That's where we have to start. How do you see other people? How do you see the waitress at the restaurant you'll go to today? Or the guys that are out there trying to fix all the power lines? Or whoever it might be, the teacher of your kids, the one who does the work that no one ever sees, the foreigner. They all are made in the image of God. We have to value them highly. I think second thing is this. We must take the time to sit on a bench and to listen to someone tell us what the world looks like from where they sit. We have to take the time. It's a great picture, isn't it? Asking someone to sit on a bench with you, or you go join someone on a bench and just say, tell me your story. Tell me what life looks like from your vantage point. Tell me what's going on. Tell me what wounds you have in your life that are still affecting you today. And maybe they tell you just about the world exterior and not themselves that might be safer. Or maybe they'll tell you about them. And all of a sudden you'll just be blown away at the incredible thing that people have been through without telling any details. And I've said it before, but I'm blown away when Diane comes home from school and she tells me what some of these kids are going through. 7th graders, 12 years old. And some of them are facing things that's mind-boggling. It's so hard to go through. And you think, oh, how could that be true at 12 years old? Because they live in a broken world. And so do you and I, and so do I. And sit on a bench. Diane's got this one girl that keeps sharing her life with her. And it's just like, holy cow. It's amazing. So, you get the picture. Hearing the story of a person and what the world looks like from where they sit. Now, you don't have to agree. You don't have to affirm it. But to value it and understand it is helpful. Okay. Next one. we must love others enough to take the risk of offering them the only message that answers the questions of life sufficiently. There's a risk in telling them maybe there's somebody that is the answer to your questions. That is the hope we have, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about you, but if these questions weren't answered by Christ, I would not be here today. I am not going to waste my time to just go do religious things. But if there are answers to the questions of life and it comes in the person of Christ, then I'm in. I am in to offer it then to others also. Then I want to be here. As much as a broken world and broken person and broken stuff, in spite of all that, I still want to be here. And thank you for letting me come. But we got to love other people. Maybe take the risk of helping them find the answers to the questions of life. And last but not least, we must live for the imperishable wreath that comes with honoring God with our lives. Guys, there is no other reward that's going to last. Nothing that will satisfy the human soul but the wreath that he gives for honoring him with the way we live. And we're committed to that. Paul said he runs to win and to win others for Christ by the way he lives. That he didn't want to be excluded at the end of the whole thing. I feel that too. I don't know how many more years I've got, 15, 20 at best. I don't want to finish poorly. I want to finish well. And I say I want it to count for something that's going to matter in eternity. Right? These are the things I think what he's saying. And I hope and trust that God's Spirit motivates your heart. Take a risk to love and to love deeply. To share the love of Christ. To live well. What are the things you need to say goodbye to? This week I said goodbye for Lent and for other reasons to Facebook. That thing was an anchor in my life. I said goodbye. I don't think I'm ever going back. But what do you need to get rid of so you can focus on the love of Christ? All right? So, how are you going to live your life? What are you going to commit to? What are you going to run for to win those who need to be won? Those who are lost to be found. That's what Paul's motivation was. I hope it's ours too. Let's pray. Father, I'm really grateful for what you did in the life of Paul. And he's quite the ambassador. In fact, called an apostle. Because he committed himself to reaching the world. And Father, you've called us to do the same. To reach the world in which we live with the only one who answers the questions of life. Thank you that you did that in the person of Christ. That he fulfills it all. That we can love him deeply and commit ourselves to him and have our lives turned upside down and inside out and to have it be right. And that we might love people deeply as a result. Father, thank you for this morning, the privilege of being together. And we recognize that Jesus is the one who paid the ultimate price to take us from being not just lost, but being dead, to being found and being alive. And may we honor you with the way we live.
raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Sin had left. Sin had left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow.
Well, you guys, as you leave today, I've chosen a passage maybe just to leave you with. And I want you to think about this in terms of yourself, but also maybe in terms of every person that we've talked about today that's made in the image of God. Okay, it's Psalm 34, verse 8. It says, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man and the woman who takes refuge in him, because there is no place else to go that is a refuge." That's for you and for every person we meet this week, okay? All right. Actually, I love you guys. Be well, be good, have fun. We'll see you next week.